The invitation list went out weeks ago. The caterers were booked, the table settings imported from Italy, and the chandeliers polished until they threw diamonds across the marble floors. My estate, $8.5 million worth of manicured perfection, was ready to host Thanksgiving dinner. But guess what? I wasn't invited. At least not by the people who should have mattered most, my own family. Yep, you heard that right. They had a celebration planned, just not with me. My name was left off the text thread, the email chain, the whole thing. A mistake, they'd probably call it. But let's not sugarcoat it. It was rejection served on a silver platter. And it stung. Because no matter how tall your ceilings are or how many zeros sit in your bank account, nothing feels colder than realizing your own blood would rather carve turkey without you. Now, picture the irony. A mansion with 14 bedrooms. A dining hall that could host royalty and me, standing in it alone. I had chefs on call, wine cellars stocked, a staff ready to serve, but no seat at the table where I wanted to be most. Funny, isn't it? How you can have everything money can buy and still feel like the poorest soul on earth. But here's the part where the story flips. Because instead of letting their rejection bury me, I decided to rewrite the script. I opened my gates that evening to people who didn't have anywhere else to go. 40 strangers, some homeless, some lonely, some just down on their luck, sat where my family should have been. And for the first time in years, my estate was filled with laughter, gratitude, and a kind of love no inheritance could measure. But hold on. Don't mistake this for a fairy tale just yet. This moment, the feast that went viral, the night strangers became family, wasn't born out of generosity alone. No, it came from years of hurt, sacrifice, and betrayal. See, people look at the mansion, the luxury cars, the lifestyle, and think it was always easy. But the truth? The road here was paved with nights of hunger, broken trust, and a past I don't talk about at family dinners, probably because I'm no longer invited to them. So, you want to know how someone goes from being cast out by their own blood to hosting a Thanksgiving that shook the neighborhood? Well, let's rewind. Back before the estate, before the fortune, before the betrayal that made me stronger. Welcome, story lovers. From where are you watching? Drop your city name in the comments so we can see how far our story travels. She wasn't born into wealth, not even close. In fact, she grew up in a 2-bedroom rental where the heat cut out every other winter, and the walls were thin enough that she could hear her parents arguing through them. Her father worked long shifts at a steel plant, and her mother pieced together odd jobs. Babysitting, sewing, anything that brought in a few extra dollars. Love was there, yes, but stability, that was always missing. And from an early age, she promised herself she would escape it. Education was her escape plan. Books were her refuge. She wasn't the type who drifted through school just waiting for graduation. No, she devoured every lesson, every challenge. While her friends daydreamed about summer vacations, she was sketching floor plans of an imaginary office where she saw herself one day running a business, building something from the ground up. She had the grades, the ambition, the vision. Teachers often said, "She's going places." And for a while it looked like they were right. She earned a scholarship, the golden ticket she thought would change everything. Business administration, numbers, strategy, management, this was her world. She pictured herself climbing corporate ladders, making bold decisions in boardrooms, maybe even owning her own firm one day. She didn't just want comfort. She wanted control, security, the kind her parents never had. But life has a way of rewriting even the neatest plans. The first crack came when her mother fell ill. Long, expensive treatments that insurance only half covered. She left school often to take her to appointments, catching up on coursework at 2 a.m. when her eyes could barely stay open. Professors understood, but understanding doesn't erase deadlines. Her scholarship slipped into probation, then dissolved completely. One semester short of graduation, she packed up her dorm and went home with tears in her eyes and debt on her back. And as if fate hadn't done enough, her personal life collapsed too. The man she thought she'd build a life with, the one who promised forever, vanished when responsibility arrived. When the medical bills grew heavier, when the fridge was emptier, when she needed support the most, he simply said, "I didn't sign up for this." And just like that, she was left alone. So she did what women like her always do. She survived. She took a job waiting tables by day and stocking shelves at night. Sleep became a luxury. She learned the brutal math of stretching $20 across a week, milk, bread, and beans one day, maybe a splurge on apples if she could afford it. When the lights were cut, she lit candles. When her shoes wore through, she stuffed cardboard inside to keep walking. But don't think for a second she stopped dreaming. She kept her old textbooks, her notes, her vision boards. At night, after 10 hours on her feet, she'd curl up with a notebook and scribble business ideas. Sometimes, she even logged into free courses just to keep her mind sharp. She told herself she wasn't done, just delayed. Still, the loneliness cut deeper than the bills. Holidays came and went with her seat at the family table quietly missing. Relatives whispered about her choices, how she had so much potential and should have done better. They didn't see the nights she skipped meals so someone else could eat, or the hours she worked until her hands blistered. They just saw absence and judged her for it. The lowest point? That came one winter when she couldn't afford heating. She wrapped herself in 3 sweaters and huddled beneath blankets, trying to convince herself she was fine. But when her breath turned visible in the air, when her body ached from the cold, she broke down and cried. She wasn't crying because she was cold. She was crying because she felt invisible, forgotten, disposable. And yet, it was in those nights that her resilience took root. Every time life cornered her, she pushed back. She clipped coupons, sold handmade crafts, even did laundry for neighbors just to keep a few more dollars in her pocket. Small acts of survival, but together they built muscle, emotional muscle that would one day carry her far beyond where anyone thought she'd go. Looking back now, she sees those years not as wasted, but as training. Training in grit, training in humility, training in how to recognize hunger, both literal and figurative. She learned what it was like to be dismissed, overlooked, left out, and that knowledge never left her. It sat quietly in her bones, waiting for the day it would matter most. Because when the invitation to Thanksgiving was revoked years later, when her own blood decided she didn't belong, it didn't destroy her. It reminded her of every locked door she once knocked on, every cold night she endured, every rejection that taught her to create her own seat at the table, and as you'll see, that rejection became the spark, the fuel, that turned her from a forgotten daughter into the woman whose table fed dozens when her family turned their backs. Her life wasn't supposed to shift that day. In fact, it began like any other, long hours, aching feet, and the dull routine of making someone else's dreams possible. She was working at a mid-tier catering company at the time, hauling trays into gleaming corporate buildings that smelled of fresh paint and power. She didn't belong there, at least not in the eyes of the executives who barely glanced at her. To them, she was invisible. A pair of hands, not a person, but invisibility can be its own kind of power. One night, after an event stretched late, she was cleaning up empty glasses in the boardroom. The clients had cleared out, the laughter and deals carried home with them. She was gathering napkins when she noticed something odd. A binder left open, papers fanned out as though someone had left in a hurry. She wasn't nosy by nature, but the bold heading caught her eye. Expense adjustments, Q3, Q4. She froze. Numbers. Rows and rows of numbers. Most people would have ignored them, but she didn't. Her mind snapped awake the way it hadn't in years. She leaned closer, her heart thumping. Something felt off. The totals weren't adding up. The math was twisted to fit a narrative. And for someone who once lived and breathed accounting, it screamed fraud. She didn't dare take the binder, but she pulled out her phone and snapped a picture. It felt like stealing a piece of forbidden fruit. She shoved the phone in her apron pocket and finished the cleanup, but all night her mind buzzed. Could it be? Had she really stumbled into something this big? When she got home, exhaustion should have knocked her out, but adrenaline kept her wired. She opened the blurry photos on her cracked screen and scribbled calculations on scrap paper. And there it was, a discrepancy of nearly 2 million, hidden under the guise of adjustments. She didn't know the whole story, but she knew enough to understand it wasn't right. This was her crossroads. Stay quiet, stay invisible, stay safe, or take the risk? But then she thought about all the years she'd been silent. All the time she let people walk away, dismiss her, erase her. Silence had never saved her before. Why would it now? So she made a choice, a dangerous one. She drafted an anonymous email to the company's internal auditors, attaching the photos and a page of her calculations. She hit send with trembling hands, half convinced she'd wake up to police at her door. The fallout was immediate. Meetings were called. Investigations launched. Within weeks, a quiet storm swept through the company corridors. Executives resigned for personal reasons. Others denied everything. But behind the chaos, someone noticed her. His name was Daniel Grant, a mid-level manager with sharp instincts and a reputation for integrity. He'd been the one piecing together the whispers about mismanagement, and her anonymous tip was the missing puzzle piece. He sought her out, not publicly, but discreetly. "You didn't just save this company," he told her in a hushed voice. "You might have saved a lot of people's jobs." And for the first time in years, she felt seen. Daniel became her quiet mentor. He knew she had the mind of an analyst trapped in the body of a caterer, and he pushed her to apply for internal roles. She hesitated. She didn't even have her degree finished. Her resume was a patchwork of survival jobs. But he kept insisting, "Your brain is your proof. The rest is just paper." It wasn't smooth sailing. Far from it. Other employees, jealous of the attention she was getting, whispered behind her back. Some called her a glorified waitress, unfit for serious work. One coworker, Linda, went so far as to sabotage her early projects, misplacing files, forgetting to pass along messages. Every step forward felt like walking through quicksand. And then came the hardest dilemma. The company offered her a role in compliance, part of the team investigating fraud. It was a promotion, a real chance. But it came with a catch. She'd be exposing not just strangers, but possibly people she'd worked alongside. People who were struggling too. Could she live with that? Could she build her future on their downfall? She wrestled with it for nights. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind. "Do right even when it costs you." And in the end, she chose integrity. If she'd learned anything, it was that lies rot everything from the inside out. So she stepped into the fire. The investigations grew larger, uncovering millions siphoned off through shell accounts and shady vendors. Each discovery made headlines in industry papers, and each time her fingerprints were quietly on the findings. She wasn't front-page news, not yet, but in certain circles her name began to carry weight. She was the woman who saw what others missed. The whistleblower who refused to stay silent, but with recognition came danger. The people she exposed didn't take kindly to being ruined. Anonymous messages appeared in her inbox, threats thinly veiled as warnings. A stranger once followed her home, forcing her to duck into a crowded cafe until he left. Fear became her shadow, but so did determination, because deep down she knew this was her shot. The turning point she'd been waiting for. Still, it wasn't just about justice. It was about reclaiming the part of herself she'd buried when she left school, when she settled for survival. That sharp, ambitious young woman wasn't gone. She'd just been waiting. And now, she was back. The estate, the millions, the viral Thanksgiving dinner, none of it would have existed without this crucible. Without the night, she dared to look closer at a binder left behind and chose courage over silence. But courage comes with a price, and as the stakes grew higher, the cost would push her to the very edge. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had once mopped the floors of this very building. Now she was walking its polished hallways as a compliance officer, holding files that could topple careers. But still, some people refused to see her as anything more than the girl who served canapés. And that was about to change. It was the quarterly review, an important one, with the boardroom packed. Executives in tailored suits sat around a glossy mahogany table, sipping mineral water as though it were champagne. She wasn't supposed to be in that room. Not officially. But Daniel had quietly insisted, "You need to be there. You found this. They need to hear it from you." When she entered, heads turned, some with curiosity, others with thinly veiled disdain. A vice president leaned to his neighbor and whispered, not quietly enough, "Isn't that the catering girl?" A ripple of laughter followed. Her pulse quickened, but her face remained calm. She took a seat at the end of the table, clutching her folder like armor. The CFO began the presentation. Slides projected glowing profits, adjusted earnings, and optimistic forecasts. His voice dripped with practiced confidence. The board nodded along. It was a performance, one she'd seen rehearsed 100 times. Finally, Daniel cleared his throat. "Before we move forward," he said, "there's a matter that needs addressing. Something discovered in the Q4 expenses." The CFO stiffened. "That's been reviewed." "Nothing material." Daniel didn't answer. Instead, he glanced at her. The room's attention shifted. She felt the weight of a dozen eyes, skeptical, dismissive. She stood. Her voice shook at first, but steadied as she unfolded her papers. "With respect," she began, "it hasn't been reviewed properly. There's a discrepancy, millions of dollars unaccounted for." The CFO chuckled, condescending. "And you are?" Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "The person who found it." She slid the documents across the table. Handwritten calculations, printouts, cross-references. Every page told the same story. Someone was stealing. Silence. Then the CFO barked a laugh. "This is nonsense. Amateur math. We don't waste time on baseless accusations." Her chest burned, but she refused to shrink. "Amateur math?" she repeated. "Tell that to the auditors. Tell it to the IRS, the SEC, and Channel 7 News." She let the words hang like thunder. "Because they already have copies." The room froze. Forks of panic cracked across the executives' faces. One muttered a curse. Another flipped through her evidence, eyes widening. The CFO's jaw tightened, his bravado draining. "You," he started, but she cut him off. "For years, you've adjusted numbers to match your narrative. You stole from shareholders, from employees who trusted you, and you thought no one would notice because you underestimated the woman clearing your glasses. Well, you were wrong." A beat of silence. Then Daniel spoke, his voice firm. "She's right. Every number checks out." The board erupted into whispers, shock, fury, disbelief. The CFO sputtered denials, but no one was listening anymore. The tide had turned. She gathered her papers, heart pounding. "I'll let myself out," she said, echoing the words she once wished she had the courage to speak. And as she walked toward the door, the silence followed her. Not the silence of dismissal, but the silence of power shifting. That was the day the caterer became the most powerful person in the room. But victory didn't feel like champagne and confetti. It felt like exhaustion, relief, and a strange ache in her chest. Because while she'd won the battle for truth, she'd lost something else along the way. The last fragile ties to her family. Word of her role spread fast. Headlines painted her as a whistleblower, a hero. The company survived because of her, but her family? They didn't celebrate her. Some said she made them look bad. Others accused her of chasing money and attention. The very people she once wanted most to impress, their approval remained locked away, and that's the cruelty of triumph. Sometimes the higher you climb, the lonelier the view becomes. Dear audience, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to give it a like. It really helps. Ruth didn't walk out of that boardroom the same woman who walked in. For years, she had been invisible, sweeping around polished shoes, scrubbing tables that weren't hers, cleaning up after voices that never once said her name. But now, her name was everywhere. News anchors repeated it with admiration, not pity. Headlines called her the janitor who brought down giants. The company tried to save face. They offered her a corner office, a six-figure salary, benefits beyond anything she had ever known. It was tempting. Not because of the money. Ruth had long ago learned that money couldn't heal every wound, but because of the validation. The same people who once treated her like a shadow now wanted her in their spotlight. But Ruth knew better. She didn't want to climb their ladder. She wanted to build her own. With the whistleblower settlement and government rewards, she had more than she had ever dreamed of. Instead of cashing it in for luxury, she turned it into purpose. She rented a small space above a laundromat, painted the walls herself, and opened Second Chance Consulting. Her mission? To train women like her who had been pushed to the margins. Single mothers, women trapped in cycles of debt, women who had talent but no opportunity. Ruth taught them accounting basics, auditing principles, and the kind of forensic skills that had once been her own dream. At first, only a handful of women showed up, but word spread. Within a year, she had dozens. Within 3 years, corporations, yes, Fortune 500s, were hiring her graduates. CEOs who once wouldn't let Ruth through the front door now begged for her expertise. Her own son, David, watched in awe. He remembered the nights she cried quietly, trying not to wake him. He remembered the meals made from scraps, the long hours, the aching silences when his father left. Now he saw his mother not as a cleaner but as a leader, a woman whose pain had been transformed into power. David thrived, too. Top of his class. Scholarship offers from universities she had once only dreamed he'd step into. He often told people, "My mom is the smartest person I know." And he meant it. But Ruth's redemption wasn't just about success. It was about healing. For years, she had carried shame, of poverty, of abandonment, of unfulfilled dreams. Now she carried gratitude. She volunteered in shelters, quietly slipping in with hot meals and supplies. She set up scholarships in her parents' names, honoring the family that had always believed in her even when the world didn't. And sometimes, late at night, she still sat with spreadsheets on her laptop. Not because she had to, but because she loved it. Numbers had always been her language of truth, and now they told a different kind of story, of resilience, of justice, of possibility. When people invited her to speak at events, she often ended with the same line, "I wasn't invisible. I was just overlooked." And sometimes the people you overlook are the ones holding the truth in their hands. The audience always rose to their feet. Ruth never bragged. She didn't flaunt her wealth or her new status. She still wore simple clothes, still took the bus sometimes, still bought secondhand furniture because it reminded her of where she came from. But when she walked into a room, people noticed. They listened. And in that listening, Ruth found her peace. Because she no longer had to shout, no longer had to prove, no longer had to wonder if she mattered. She had already rewritten her story. She was no longer the janitor. She was the woman who turned betrayal into justice, silence into power, pain into purpose. She was undeniable. Dear friends, if this story touched you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Stories like Ruth's remind us, no matter how small the world tries to make you feel, your truth can be the loudest voice in the room. They once called her just a cleaner, but they were wrong. Ruth wasn't cleaning floors. She was cleaning up broken systems, dirty secrets, and the stains of greed that no one else dared to touch. Her mop didn't define her. Her resilience did. Her quiet courage, her unshakable dignity, her refusal to let life's betrayals bury her dreams, those were her true tools. And what do we learn from Ruth's story? That strength isn't loud. It doesn't always roar in boardrooms or demand the spotlight. Sometimes, strength is a woman holding a family together on $20 a week. Sometimes it's the invisible worker who notices the truth that billionaires miss. Sometimes, strength is silence until the right moment to speak. Think about it. How many Ruths have you walked past without seeing? How many people in your life, cashiers, janitors, drivers, carry untold brilliance, stories of survival, wisdom the world has yet to hear? Ruth didn't just change her own life. She sparked a movement. Her consulting firm has now trained hundreds of women who were once dismissed as unskilled. Some of them sit today as auditors, executives, even business owners. And last year, Ruth received the National Integrity Award, honoring not just her courage, but the countless lives she lifted with it. The twist. One of the women she mentored, once a single mother working nights at a diner, is now the lead accountant at the very company that once ignored Ruth. Full circle. Justice with a smile. Ruth never sought revenge. She sought redemption for herself, for her son, for every overlooked woman who was told she wasn't enough. And in the end, that redemption became her legacy. So the next time you walk into a room, ask yourself, who here is invisible? Who here might be the Ruth in the shadows? Because sometimes the person you least expect is the one carrying the truth that can save us all. Because the quietest woman in the room might just be the one who changes it. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories and new videos.